And when we talk about building, how big is that? That doesn't cover like 25 acres or something like that.
No. Length of a football field, but not nearly as wide, something like that. I've seen many of them as I drove through the country. Suffice it to say that they're small enough that the animals are in pretty tight quarters. And as a lot of animal welfare groups will say, the average intensively produced chicken has a space smaller than an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to live in. So they're pretty tightly crammed.
Tell me about Don Webb.
Doing the research was really enjoyable and poignant because I got to meet courageous people who in their neighborhoods are, I want to say fighting, I wonder if there's a better word for that, are opposing and standing up against intensive production. Don Webb is a 70-something gentleman who lives in North Carolina and who himself was an intensive pig producer. Couple of decades ago. He had lots of pigs, a perfectly reasonable, he felt, thing to do to make a living. And he discovered over a series of months that his neighbors couldn't sit outside anymore, like the woman we spoke about earlier, because his hogs smelled too much. Again, you get too many animals in too small a space. And the normal sort of process of the dissipation of farm smells doesn't apply anymore. There's just too many animals with too small a space. And he felt that he was being unkind to his neighbors and really began to think about what he was doing. He's not the only one. There are at least a handful of people I've heard of who stopped being intensive farmers once they found out what the impact was, but it takes a brave person to do that. He has since become an opponent of intensive livestock operations and goes to meetings and writes letters and stands up against the amalgamation of the industry in the hands of a few and really the demise of more and more family livestock farms.
So when you go to a big supermarket, and they're bigger and bigger, they've gotten bigger, and you see all this meat, there's so much meat. Oh, and I appreciate in your book the fact that you say flush.
Okay.
That's something that I really appreciated. I've been using that term. How many animals do we kill? That's the first question. How many animals are we killing?
Well, one of the numbers that always strikes me and strikes a lot of people is that we know that there are over 7 billion human beings on the planet right now. There are more than 3 times as many livestock animals on the planet as there are human beings. So that is just a really useful figure that
Especially when you don't see them.
Absolutely. That I think brings it home to a lot of people. There are just so many animals because, again, we expect meat so often. Now, a lot of those animals are chickens. They're small, but still there's a lot of animals on the planet. Conservative estimates say that we human beings kill over 50 billion livestock animals each year. Again, each year we kill over 50 billion livestock animals for food. I mean, there's so many interesting issues here. One of them that's interesting to me is concerns animal welfare of other kinds. For example, people are talking about how the sled dogs were treated, and people talk about dog racing and these other instances of what most people would call animal abuse. And absolutely, animals should not be treated in these ways, but the major number one cause of animal abuse on the planet, hands down, no comparison, is farm animals and the way that they're treated for food. So that if we're going to get angry about some of these other animal welfare situations, really, if we're going to be at all consistent, we have to not stop eating meat, but stop supporting the factory farming industry and start becoming more discerning about our intake of animal products and try only to buy animal products from animals that were treated well.
Do we actually eat that much meat?
Well, Canadians and Americans, the standard figure is about ½ a pound per person per day, which is a lot. So 2 large burgers a day, roughly, or 2 large chicken wings per day per person. These numbers are different depending on where you live in North America, and they're also decreasing a little. There actually is a measurable tendency or trend now for people to cut back a little on their meat consumption. It's been happening even in the United States, which is the country of one of the largest meat consumers in the world. They're moderating their meat intake a little. It's very interesting. Because when I started on this, people would say, people will never cut back on their meat consumption. People love to eat meat. Fine, most people enjoy eating meat. But the trend is catching on.
So part of the industry as well is the people who have to work within it and the people who have to kill the animals. Talk a bit about that and what that means for those people. Do people get desensitized? Is this good for all of our mental health?
Yeah. Well, part of my background is in psychology, and I'm really aware of that phenomenon, that really important one that you raised of desensitization. I think that we all get desensitized to violence or problems to which we are overexposed, absolutely. I didn't do any personal research on that, but numerous people have. For example, Eric Schlosser in Fast Food Nation talks a lot about the psychological difficulties of working in environments in which animals are clearly, to put it mildly, not in natural environments and are killed in ways that are not always kind to the animals, and that it does harden people. Yeah, I think must be a very difficult job. It's also documented to be a very dangerous job. Partly because of the number of animals that are cranked through these systems. And workers have got sharp knives, and they are on a protocol where they have to kill or, process a lot of animals per hour, per minute. It's a really tough work.
Do you think if people met the creatures they were eating and could see them and be around them, that they might eat less meat?
Probably. Although I've spoken to people who are raised on farms who say, well, don't tell me to become a vegetarian because death is part of life on the farm and we name our animals, but then when it's time, we kill them. And I understand that and I can respect that point of view because the animals are treated well during life. I don't think that if people met the animals they were going to eat, they would necessarily not want to eat them. Would they eat less? I think they'd be more discerning in how much they ate and what they ate, yeah.
I know a lot of times for food advertisements and stuff, we see, cow characters who, are going to be hamburger, but they're happy about it, that kind of thing. And I have animals around me in my life, and it's very interesting when people come over to visit and the chickens are making contact and maybe want to sit on their lap because they like them. And that's sort of the difference. People are like, they don't know what these animals are like, that they are actually characters and have personalities. Talk a bit about that. Talk about some of the farmers you've met, actually. They were doing the small farming.
Yeah, and let me just say a word about that. Because part of my background is in psychology and neuroscience. I have a PhD in neuroscience. I've done some scientific research on animal sentience for animal welfare groups. And there's no doubt that animals way down the evolutionary scale, right to tiny animals, have, I don't want to say where to draw the line because that gets too detailed, but all of these animals that we use for food are definitely sentient, meaning that they have awareness and they have the capacity to experience pain and suffering as well as joy and pleasure. And there have been beautiful research done on animal joy and animal pleasure. But I think it's true that most people don't recognize, because most of us are urbanites now and don't have personal experience, that animals have personalities, that they feel emotion of many of the same types that we do. So I think you're right.
Now, somebody said to me that
It's fine.
Somebody said to me, well, maybe it's better to eat and kill the animals that are mistreated than to take the animal who's having a happy life and has had kids, had their babies and have a family there.
Okay.
What would you say to that person?
If we've got a bunch of animals that have had sad lives, perhaps we should end it for them. But I'm talking about changing a system for the future. I'm talking about, myself and many other people around the world are talking about changing a system so that no animals, or as few as possible, are mistreated.
I'm fortunate. I live on Main Island, and we do have local farmers. We have, and of course that's vegetation, but also if I was going to eat meat, which I don't, that is the meat that I would eat.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about some of the small farmers you met.
It was really wonderful to meet people who raise animals thoughtfully and kindly. And because they raise them in low density systems, so they don't have them crowded into buildings, they're also, by and large, raising them sustainably. They're not producing too much manure for the area of land on which it can be spread as fertilizer, et cetera. They're not producing too much in the way of greenhouse gases for the amount of meat produced. They're not using antibiotics. This is a huge problem. And they're not using other chemicals and other drugs of various kinds on the animals. It was an interesting transition for me because I began on this path 25 years ago as a vegetarian, feeling like that was important to me, and it is important to me, but I came to understand the beauty of raising animals in a loving way and in a way that is integrated ecologically into other agriculture. I think we're all on a food journey trying to figure out, we're all on many journeys, but part of our journey for all of us is figuring out what to eat, not only for our health, although that's important, but also for everyone else, for the other species, for the planet. And it's a journey, it's a process.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Patrice.
And the book is High Stakes, Why and How to Eat Less Meat. Thank you so much for doing this.
Check out the menu of almost any restaurant. The message is everywhere that meat should be the center of our meals. And it often is. On average, Canadians and Americans each consume 3 to 4 pounds of chicken, pork, or beef per week. But new scientific research has a different message, as you'll read in High Stakes, Why and How to Eat Less Meat. The message is that the ways we're producing livestock and the amounts of meat we're eating are beyond what is healthy for the planet or ourselves. The message is also that we can do something about it. There are tens of billions of livestock animals on Earth. They use a lot of land and fresh water and put greenhouse gases, manure, antibiotics, and other chemicals into our environment. As well, meat-centered diets make us vulnerable to a range of chronic diseases. For the environment, there's nothing wrong with livestock, and for health, there's nothing wrong with meat, in moderation. So what can we do? Lower our consumption of animal products, support sustainable livestock producers, and encourage our governments to do the same. It's all here, along with delicious meatless recipes and practical tips to show that all of us, from meat eaters to vegans, can be part of the solution. To join the movement and be part of the solution, order your copy now of High Stakes, Why and How to Eat Less Meat from New Society Publishers at highstakesbook.com or newsociety.com.